Hello everyone, welcome to more for Top 5 in the Black Shadow. This is the series where I take a particular subject for Dune Imperium and I give you my top 5 tips to help improve your game. I have been looking forward to this video for quite a while. It is time to talk about Princess Irulan, daughter to the Emperor, my favorite leader of the whole entire Uprising game to play, and I dare say I think it might be Paul Dennis as well, seeing him playing a ton of Irulan. Very fun, very unorthodox, a bit tricky to use truthfully, but I think very fascinating. One thing I have noticed over the course of my time playing Dune Imperium, be it base, Uprising, or whatever it is, I do find that playing leaders that kind of demand a bit of attention, a bit of focus of what you're doing, and a bit of planning generally tends to make me play the game better. It gives me more reason to kind of focus on what I'm doing. I do find occasion, I've talked about this before with a couple of leaders that I just don't find very interesting. I can be a bit laissez-faire about it. Irulan is anything but that. Very fascinating, but you've got to definitely be paying attention to what you're doing. She has the ability to really surprise your opponents with a couple of really strange unorthodox moves out of nowhere and surprise dumps of resources to get to spaces that no one thought you could get to. Real cool stuff like that. But she is also prone to an occasional bad card draw. We think all leaders can suffer from that, but for Irulan, it can be really painful because of the way that she works and the fact that her ring ability is so key to her use and is the cornerstone of how to use her, I think, fairly effectively. So a couple of bad draws here and there can cause a lot of damage and makes it a bit hard to recover from. But if you're willing to kind of think outside the box and even make occasionally a couple of real wild looking moves and some strange decisions, you can legitimately just throw your opponent off the scent and then reveal your true intentions later on and win games that you never thought likely. Not really a front runner is Irulan, very good at kind of staying with the pack and then making that late game surge sort of round 7, round 8 and looking to cash in then. So let's have a look at her passive ability first. Imperial Birthright. When you reach 2 influence with the Emperor, you get an intrigue card. Much very similar to Margot and the Bene Gesserit. This is pretty straightforward. Also runs with the same rules that you can actually reacquire this bonus. If you ever get up to 2 persuasion and drop back down, you can drop back up and reacquire it. There's no limit on that, which can be very cool for Irulan. I'll talk a bit more about that later on. While this ability is not nothing, it's also not a ton to shout about truthfully. This is not going to single-handedly win the game by any stretch of the imagination, and is probably weaker to some other leaders in the game. But it does make visits to spaces that people otherwise don't really want to go to a lot more inviting. Dutiful Service with the Emperor is not a particularly well-regarded space at the moment because it's not giving you any real initial benefits. Obviously you will need to get your friendship here anyways, but it gives you here a contract which, you may or may not want depending on what turns up. But a great thing, at least for Irulan, is that you're always making progress towards Birthright. And that extra intrigue is pretty good, considering that you look at the overall board, your sources of intrigues from the board is Secrets, Assembly Hall, and that's it. I mean, technically, you've got Second High Counter Visit. It's pretty rare. You've got Imperial Privilege. Well, you kind of got to get to there first. So that extra intrigue early on can be pretty nice for Irulan. And sometimes you find something that really makes a huge difference, either in an upcoming fight or give you maybe some mid-game objectives, some victory point conditions, stuff like that. It's not to be slept on. So next up, let's talk about Chronicler's Insight. As I said earlier, this is the absolute cornerstone of playing Princess Irulan, and how you use this ring will drastically define how well you're going to play. I think it's that important. I would argue, in a way, it's about as important a ring for a leader as anyone in the entire game, except for, I guess, probably Staban. That's about it, but he's that special case. We'll talk about later on in this series. Anyways, so Chronicler's Insight allows you to do actually a variety of different things and decide which one of those is more useful. So you can choose to either acquire a card that costs 1 persuasion only from the Imperium row and take it directly into your hand, or you can trash a card from your hand, not your discard pile, but in your actual hand at that time. And if it has any kind of persuasion cost, i.e. it's not a starter card, it's not a recon or a dagger or anything like that, you get 2 spice into your reserves. Although, it should be noted that you can indeed trash those starter cards as well, you just won't get the spice for it. So let's tackle all of these in steps. First of all, let's talk about just general trashing from hand. This can be pretty effective early on just to do, and it's never really a bad option, typically speaking. Here's like an example hand here for Irulan. This is pretty effective. You know, you've got your Diplo, you're going to be using that somewhere, and then your Signet Ring, you can just use that to go wherever. Arakeen, go to mining early, maybe go gather support for later rounds, play it, trash your dagger, that's out of there, and then you've used this, and you've still got your 4 persuasion, or maybe even 5 potentially, to buy some decent cards from the Imperium row. It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of a bit sort of like Armady Cans used to be, and just getting rid of those earlier starter cards nice and quickly. It just improves the quality of your deck. It means the cards that you're then buying into your hand, you're seeing more frequently. You've got to be a little bit careful of doing this, however. It can be really easy to start trashing your daggers really aggressively, because it's an obvious choice. But of course, bear in mind that if you get rid of both your daggers, well, your only other council access is your Signet Ring card, and that can be a problem. So if you're getting rid of your daggers, make sure you're picking up something to pick up for that. Prepare the Ways are natural options. There might be better ones in the row. And that's what I try to do with Irulan if I'm going to be trashing very aggressively, is I kind of like, okay, if I'm going to trash... I don't look what I'm going to trash. I kind of look, all right, what am I going to buy from the row? If I'm going to buy some city access cards, maybe I get rid of my recon. If I'm going to be buying cards that have that, the council access, the daggers can go, stuff like that. You just don't want to particularly cripple yourself on access, especially early game. Because, of course, if you only got one access to council and you're in a Swordmaster race and you don't find this, well, you've got a problem. So the other side of the coin, of course, is picking up those 1-costers from the Imperium row early and put them directly into your hand. This is a much more kind of acquired and nuanced skill I think to get a lot of use out of. And again, if you just play Irulan and just trash starter cards out your hands, you're doing totally fine. But I think there is a really, really cool skill in kind of deciding what to do here and working out. So what I've done as an example here, so these are all of the 1-cost cards that are available in Dune Imperium normally. The 4 from the base game, Chome Delegate, which is introduced in Rise of Ix, and High Priority Travel, which was introduced in the Immortality expansion. Now, the general value of these, especially these 4 in particular, are not great, let's be honest. Sardaukar Infantry isn't too good. Assassination Mission's not great either. And I haven't even put Scout here because I refuse to acknowledge it as a card. Although things did improve with Delegate and High Priority Travel. Now, you compare that with the cards that are now available in the Uprising expansion, and you'll notice that there's just immediately, you can tell straight away, there's a lot more going on with these cards overall, and there is definitely a lot of fun nuance to them. Some of them I think are stronger than others, although the most notable one, it has to be said, is Space-Time Folding here. A 1 Persuasion faction access card. It's pretty good, right? You know, and again, that comes with the Holo Projector ability, which was a tech in Rise of Ix. You know, and again, for 1 card, all right, we only got 1 access. Obviously, that's a bit of a problem. Well, spies exist. You know, it's not a big deal there particularly. But even some of these other cards I think are actually pretty decent here. Smuggler's Harvester for a bit extra spice generation can be useful. Spice can be hard to come across sometimes. Unswerving Loyalty. I actually think this is a better card that looks in the hands of Irulan, and sometimes I would just pick this up straight round 1 because it allows you to be really aggressive in the first round or threaten being aggressive and have some garrison troops in stage for the next combats. You can go heavy for both combats as well and get a lot of rewards. That could be really cool. Winning Woman is nice, and it allows you to add an additional sword into your hand, so this coupled with your couple of daggers can actually make your combat strength a bit tricky, plus the additional persuasion. So this is actually a good card for like keeping options open for later on in the same round. But Sardaukar Soldier is like low-key one of my favorite cards of the game. I'm unapologetic about that. And this card is made entirely for Princess Irulan. This is like her card in the game. Not only is it Persuasion and the Dagger, whenever you then trash this card later in the game, you get an Intrigue, which is pretty sweet. And this is where we then get into the real crux of Irulan, being able to trash cards for spice. I think one of the really cool things Irulan is the fact that she can take some of these kind of low-costing, not very necessarily well-regarded cards and make them into something much greater than it normally would be. You know, again, picking up like this for some surprise deliver supplies, get you to some makers maybe the following round is pretty cool, stuff like that. This pairing for some Fremen Bond, which enables other cards, is really good. But again, the great thing is that then once you've got the use out of it in a later round, you draw your ring, you draw one of these cards, you don't need it anymore, you trash it. And that way, not only you get in the card, it's done its job, it's not polluting your deck anymore, but it's giving you that extra spice at the same time. And that's where Irulan is really scary. Irulan is really, really good at picking up a load of supplies out of nowhere. You think for Irulan, if Irulan, for example, sends her ring to, say, Haga Basin, even with no spice here, and trashes like one of these starter cards, she's getting 4 spice here. And that's pretty darn good. And you know what that gets you to? Highliners. It gets you to Sardaukar, it gets you to Insular Shipping, it gets you to these very, very powerful spaces, which otherwise you wouldn't be able to get access to, and people wouldn't expect you to get access to. Several times I've played Irulan, and she just finds Highliners out of absolutely nowhere. It means the Highliner contracts on her are very deadly, especially the contract that gives you, say, the +2 troops, because you can just make the spice out of nothing, and players can't really prepare for that. It might take you a moment to get there, but again, if you've got a spy here, you're always threatening it, and it can make lives for other people absolute mayhem. Okay, and so that was a lot on the ring, but I think a lot needed to be talked about that because it is so important for her. So let's mop up with the last 2 little bits here. First up for number 4 is going to be seat position for Irulan. I personally feel that she's kind of okay anywhere. I do think she's got some extra value intrinsically with being sort of in the back couple of spots, though, in seats 3 and 4, especially because it allows the ability to kind of harass early game conflicts. I think Irulan, if she can get hold of some extra resources from 2nd or 3rd place in the first round, I think makes a big, big deal. Getting shut out entirely can be a bit awkward for her. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I think getting hold of those extra resources, be it Spice, Solari, or even the extra intrigues, I think is really good for her. But it doesn't mean she doesn't have to just be played in these. She's got a lot more versatility than that, I think, all things considered. I think the other thing that is also relevant for Irulan is trying to get a feel for who you think your opponents are going to be. And in particular, I would say, if you think all your opponents are going to be very combat-heavy leaders, that can give Irulan a lot of fun to have here. Irulan really works nicely. She's kind of got her own little niche to occupy. And we've had it on stream a few times where I've played as Irulan, and our opposition has been Muad'Dib, Fade Ralpha, and Gurney. And what I've generally done is just let them beat each other to half death for the first several rounds, and we just pick like a mid-game combat, maybe a round 4, round 5 that matches us, we go in heavy for that, and then prep up for round 7, bomb that, and just try and take it down. And other than that, focus on things they're not doing, focus on factions, focus on deck quality, focus on a spiceless flow here and there. I do think that's definitely a really good strength for her. So, for my wildcard 5th tip here, there's a couple spots I want to make a mention of for Irulan here. The first off, and kind of, if it's not obvious already, and it's similar to what I said with Fade, is you've got to respect Irulan's ring. It is so important to her that you get that used as much as humanly possible. You've got to be very careful of when it's not in your hand. And if there is a chance, and a realistic chance, that you might draw it on like your last action, and then it's just reveals 1 persuasion, and you lose its use, that is potentially really crippling Irulan. You've got to be really, really careful about that. So be careful if you're going to like an Arakeen last action, or an Espionage, or stuff like that. Unless you're buying Spice Must Flows, and it's like the end of the game, losing that ring access in that ability is really, really painful. So you've got to be careful of that. What I would say is if you don't start the game with Irulan's ring in hand, then not a bad strategy I like to employ is trying to draw somewhere in that first round, in that first action especially. There's several spaces that do it, you know, Fremkit, Arakeen, Accept Contract as well, all do it. And what you're trying to do is seeing if you pick your ring up straight away, because if you do, and you get it for your second action, and assume you've got no other faction access, that sort of thing, where you can just use your ring and just trash a card or pull a card from the row as normal, and that's all well and good. But what you can also do is if you draw with your very first action and it's not your signet ring, then what that means is that in your second round, assuming you don't draw again, of course, you're going to draw your signet ring. But what you might also potentially do is draw it with a card that you bought from the first round. And what that means is that your second round, first action of the game, you can start trashing cards immediately from your hand for a spice, for 2 spice even, which can be really effective. Cards like Prepare the Way, for example, are very effective at that because it's always fairly cheap. It's guaranteed. It's going to be there. A few times, I just buy a Prepare the Way or 2 into the deck purely for trashing for Irulan to turn to spice later on, stuff like that. And I think that extra 2 spice, like in your third action, I think is really, really good because it gets you to places like, you know, Sardaukar and Highliner and plenty of espionage access way before some other people get it. And of course, if you can do that with Irulan and maybe get to like Spice Refinery and that as well, you're getting loads of money to pay for your Swordmaster. So there's just lots of good things. Again, I wouldn't say that's an absolute do it all the time, but again, it's just giving yourself like a wealth of different options to explore, and I think that's one you should definitely keep in mind. But overall, I think that's pretty much it for this top 5 video. As I said, Irulan, I think she definitely rewards playing very unorthodox, which is something I do enjoy doing anyways. But I think for Irulan as well, and I've shown in a few streams, is that she's not someone who's going to be like in rounds 4, round 5 a lot of the time, like massively heavy opposition, because she's not a heavy combat leader. She accelerates sort of mid to late game when you start getting those spice infusions in and your deck quality starts edging out over your opponents. So I think what you got to do for Irulan is just kind of keep yourself scoring as consistently as possible and just give yourself a chance to keep yourself in the game. At some point, somewhere, an opportunity will present itself for you to exploit, be it around a tier 3 combat or an alliance you can steal or some other kind of funky move you find. Maybe it's a card from the road, you know, like a junction, like a Corinth City or a victory point generator, and you kind of base your game around that. And that's what you do as Irulan. You wait for the chance to appear and you take full advantage of that. I think that's the way to go, Irulan. Again, not easy, and again, sometimes RNG will just kick you absolutely down the throat. But when that's not happening, I think she's a joy to play. That's going to do it for us here. Of course, if you like what we do, please feel free to follow and support the channel here on Neon Assets. We hugely appreciate about that. We've got a few more leaders left to go in this series, and next up is going to be the old man himself, looking at Princess's father, Emperor Shaddam. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you soon.